In a recent interview with Daily Faceoff's Frank Saravalli, Kent Hughes reveals some of his draft plans heading into this offseason, and I gotta say, it has us quite excited for what's to come. We have to get into everything he said on that front. Plus, one of the most underrated Habs prospects as of late, Jakub Dobes, has been dominant in Laval after a brutal first few months of the season. And finally, a note on Cole Caufield and one stat that shows he's in for a monster year next year. We have to get into all of that coming up on this episode of Habs Digest. Jesse, we're going to open up with Cole Caufield, and there's one stat that we saw in LDS on their website that sheds a bit of light into Caufield's goal struggles. Now, while as of late, he has certainly been finding new ways to put the puck into the net, some softer ways, some dangles, some wraparound, stuff like that. There's one stat that stands out among the rest, and that is his average speed of his shot. From last year to this year, it has dropped from about 89 kilometers an hour to about 84 kilometers an hour, down about 5 kilometers an hour on his shot, Jesse, and that's one thing we've noticed. He's not scoring as much off those heavy rips as he did last year, but he's finding ways to be a bit more creative, whether that's with his playmaking or finding some other ways to score goals. And while he'll occasionally still rip one home, those aren't going home as much as maybe he would have wanted this season. But to me, this is a really good omen for next year when that velocity maybe finally gets back up, that he could score even more than we thought.
And Kent recently said in an interview that he does expect players, sometimes young players like Cole Caufield, to take a step back for whatever reason. Maybe it's kind of rehabbing from an injury. Maybe it's just in relation to just their overall sort of progression, right? But absolutely, you have to feel like Cole Caufield, that it's going to come back. It is a little bit worrying just because so much of his game comes from his shot. You know, he's only scoring on 8% of his shot compared to 16% of last year. But like you said, you have to feel like that shoulder is going to heal. And there might be a little bit of a blessing in disguise. As a result of that, he's had to rely on his playmaking a little bit more, as well as just an increased focus on getting it on the forecheck, just that 200-foot game, right? So it's really allowed him to try and kind of really complete himself as a player. And you have to feel once that shot does get back, that he's going to be better than ever.
Exactly right. Now, if he can still score 20 goals this year with his average shot being way slower and his shot percentage being way lower, you got to imagine, like you said, once that shoulder's fully back, he'll be good to go. And we've heard different timelines on this full recovery from the shoulder surgery, ranging anywhere from 12 months to 16 months, anything like that. But it's going to be awesome to see Cole Caufield take this next step in his development, get that shot fully back, increase it by that 5 kilometers an hour back to where we were, and I cannot wait to see what's in store. But we're going to change subjects really quick now, Jesse, and we're going to talk a bit more about Jakub Dobes. And he is honestly being so slept on right now. Jakub Dobes, of course, had a pretty rough first few months of the season for sure. I'll bring up his stats this season. 906 save percentage. To you guys think, oh, that's actually not that bad. Well, what if I told you it was in the mid 800s about a month or two into the season? This guy has been phenomenal as of late. There was a nice article written by La Presse. There's a few stats here. Last season, only one goalie played 50 games in the AHL. That's Dustin Wolf. This year, there's only two who can do it. And one is Jakub Dobes. They go on to say Jakub Dobes himself said, hey, you know what? Mentally, physically, I can play another 20 or 30 matches. And they said that since his change, he's done 36 matches this season after a pretty brutal start, like we said. And in 28 of them, he had a 900 save percentage. Jesse, what are your thoughts on Jakub Dobes' season and specifically his turnaround? Because I know it takes goalies sometimes a lot longer to get into their grooves in the NHL or AHL, wherever it is, but he's 22, he's 6'5", and he has been amazing over the last few months for Laval.
Yeah, since December 8th, he's really been able to turn around. And to answer your question, Josh, I feel a little bit bad, to be honest, for how he's quietly having such a good second half of his season. Sorry about that, Dobie, but he's kind of taking it back to the day where it's like, where goalies used to play the lion's share of the games where you really had that 1A, pushing that 50 plus games of hockey. You have to feel like this is obviously good for him just to get so much puck underneath his belt, right? But the better story is obviously he's been able to improve so much in this last stretch of the year for him, right? In the last 28 out of his 36 games, he's been able to have a save percentage of over 900, right? So he's putting in more often not fairly consistently very good effort, giving his team an opportunity to win. So it's a really nice development, right? Obviously, we got a lot of young guys that are really high, I think, in the organization in terms of the depth chart, right? But, Jakub Dobes, we can't rule him out just yet.
No, and a reminder, guys, like this is a guy who had a couple of phenomenal college seasons, 35 games in 21-22, putting up a 934 save percentage, followed by a 918 last year. We had high hopes for him, and he started the season quite slow. We talked a lot about him at the end of last year. But he has turned it up. He has really turned it up in the last little bit. As Laval is heading for their big playoff push, Jakub Dobes has been at the crux of this, right? So amazing to see his development, like you said. Seeing these guys grow is one of the biggest things we could hope for. And with Fowler in the system, even a guy like Volokin, there are some other goalies. It's just great to see one of these guys starting to really figure it out. It's a great news for us Habs fans. Final thing, though, Jesse, we have to talk about some other potential prospects that might be coming to the Montreal Canadiens, as Kent Hughes was in an interview with Daily Faceoff's Frank Saravalli, one of the insiders in the NHL, and he had a lot to say on this interview. It's about a 30-minute interview. I suggest you go take a watch at it, have a listen wherever you take in your podcasts or your YouTube interviews, whatever it is. But he said a few things, Jesse, and one thing he mentioned was specifically about drafting and who to draft where. Now, Frank was kind of like, hey, you have a lot of defensemen. Like, does this change any of your thoughts? Roughly speaking, there's more to it than that. But Kent kind of said, like, you know what? You draft the best player available. But if it comes down to it and the best player available is someone you kind of already have a lot of prospects like in that area. For example, he actually said, if you have a lefty that you're looking at drafting, maybe you'll think about trading up or down. Something that we know need is something the Habs might want to look into more, Jesse. But to hear that Hughes is like, if that top prospect is a position that we're not really looking at, we could trade up or down. I think that gives us a lot of great insight into some stuff that could be coming at the draft, because trades up and trades down have been it's been a hot topic for Montreal Canadiens fans.
That's it. A fair question when being asked, is the best player available? Or is it really need? He's saying like a little bit of both really matters, and when your NHL, teams, they're definitely taking into consideration what they need. But Josh, it's fascinating to like look back at previous drafts and then you kind of study, like it's, obviously some players, sometimes some teams rather, they miss out on some great players because they are going for a need, right? So obviously it's so important to consider, like, if there's, let's say you're stacked on D, but you got a chance to draft like a Scott Niedermayer type, it's like, well, in retrospect, kind of looking back, it probably would have been the smart move to draft the Scott Niedermayer if you feel like the player that would kind of go to that, right? But that's what's so hard to always kind of balance out. Obviously, we know what this team needs, and it's about kind of keeping your fans happy, but also doing what's best for the organization. So I think Kent knows that in an ideal world, we are definitely drafting forward, but he's just that pragmatic sort of GM, right? He doesn't want to take any sort of options, off the table at all, and it definitely makes sense. You have to feel like he is. All signs are really pointing to that, right? But obviously, you got to always look at this objectively.
Yeah, and I think they're also going to look at it objectively. He said one thing, you don't want to overthink. The question was, throughout the season, you're evaluating prospects or even people you might want to bring into the organization in the future. How do you deal with these guys going up and down the rankings all season? He's like, well, you just don't overreact to it. You try not to be too reactionary. You just build your profile of what you want and you go get that. And I think that's something they're really looking at. I mean, with this draft coming up, there are so many amazing prospects. Again, this is Tankathon. There's a lot of different mock drafts out there. For example, Elite Prospects is way different from this. They have Zane Parekh at 13th and Berkeley Catton up at 5th. There's a lot of moving parts here. Consensus, of course, Macklin Celebrini at 1. But even in a situation like this, Jesse, 3 lefty in the top 10 here. You see Sam Dickinson, you see Anton Siliev, the 6'7 beast, and then Zeev Boyum out of the University of Denver, who has had a phenomenal college season. And you're looking at some guys that very well could be considered the top picks for the Montreal Canadiens. So let's just say it now. If the Habs, well, you know what? I'm just going to predict this. I think on draft night, I think the Habs will have maybe 1, maybe 2 forwards. And if those guys aren't available, I think we'll see a draft night trade. In fact, I think they're going to trade their later first-round pick no matter what, whether that's to move up or move down. Maybe not their top 5, 6, 7, wherever that pick ends up being. I think that there's enough depth right now in this draft from 2 to 15 that you'll probably be able to get one of the guys that you want in that spot. But I really do think Kent is going to trade at least the later pick to do exactly what he said, right? Maybe your second first-round pick, you don't want another defenseman. This is where you really get that chance to move up or down in the draft in the first round to get a guy you want. I think that's almost a certainty. I don't know what you think about that.
It's interesting. I think a big part of where we actually land with that first pick will really play into our strategy. With that later pick, we'll know, okay, this is what we want. And then that gives us the flexibility. If we feel like we can really get a crack at what we want right off the bat, then that gives us our flexibility with our later pick to kind of get a little bit more creative to that, and everything. That obviously being a huge luxury, but a very high chance, right, that the Habs could drop possibly in a top 3 sort of thing like that as well, right? So it's going to be so interesting. It's like, we know we want that offensive guy, right? But We've seen past, general managers, we won't name names, right? Where there's maybe been a mistake in hindsight where, we need an offensive guy. We draft Kotkaniemi, and maybe that wasn't the best sort of pick there as well, right? Obviously, there could have been other players while it's still being an offensive. That being said, right, is it so important to really go for need, but also just, getting the best player possible? But you have to really trust Kent, to make these best, picks possible. Because again, we have to remember with him, he's not just a GM. He's also a coach. He's also a player development staff. Like, this guy is just a full hockey palate, like mega mind, right? So he's definitely going to figure it out and get the right solution there.
Yeah, and he's going to keep cooking. I mean, Kent, we know what he does. Former player agent, as he said in this interview, he'll use his advantage. Well, he'll use his knowledge to his advantage. He coached his kids. He's done everything there is under the sun, and I have full faith that he'll make a good draft pick. After the turnout of these recent picks, I'm super, super excited for the future. What do you guys think about Kent Hughes' comments on his potential draft strategy? Do you think the Habs might move up or down in the draft depending on which prospects are available? Leave us a comment down below. But that'll do it for this episode of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Guys, you subscribed like crazy the last few days. Thank you for the turnout in yesterday's live stream, by the way. And don't forget, if you're still watching, 6:15 p.m. on Mondays, every Monday, we have live streams. We will also be live streaming the draft lottery and the draft for all your viewing pleasure. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host, Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.